Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the first Teaching and Learning Center presentation of the 2021-2022 academic year. It is my pleasure to welcome Amy Fisk, our Dean for Accessibility, and Rebecca Mushtare, I hope I said that semi-close, from SUNY Oswego, who will be giving a presentation on the impact of remote learning on our students with disabilities. Thank you both, Amy and Rebecca, for this presentation.
Thank you, Dave. I'm going to share my screen. And just to remind everyone that you are certainly able to show subtitles at the bottom of the screen if you feel like that would be more accessible for you. Excuse me. If you click on the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen, and you'll be able to show subtitles and or the auto transcript. So again, my name is Amy Fisk. I'm the Assistant Dean for Accessibility here at Geneseo. I joined in February of 2020, just a few weeks before we all shifted remote. So that it's been an interesting year, but an exciting year to be here at Geneseo.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us. I am Rebecca Mushtare, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Art and Design, the outgoing associate director of our teaching center at SUNY Oswego, and the new incoming associate dean of our graduate studies program at SUNY Oswego.
So during this session, we're going to share excerpts of interviews that we conducted with our SUNY Oswego and SUNY Geneseo students who were connected with their respective disability or accessibility services office. We collected this data in spring of 2020. We wanted to learn more about the impact of remote learning and online learning that they had on their academic experience. We'll show how a UDL, or Universal Design for Learning framework, supports students in general. We'll talk about that, but specifically students with disabilities. And we'll talk about some helpful tools and teaching practices that will be discussed. But we did want to focus primarily on those student stories, those narratives from students and their experience this past year. Just to go over our agenda, we'll start with a brief overview of our design, how we collected the data. We'll talk about our findings, again, with a focus on that qualitative piece, the student narrative, and the three main themes that were emerged from reviewing that data. And we'll end with a Q&A. We're trying to be a little more interactive, modeling some great UDL tools. And we'll be utilizing Jamboard, which Rebecca introduced me to this past year. Perhaps you can put that in the chat, Rebecca, since I'm unable to. And maybe you can talk a little bit about what Jamboard is and how we'll be using it.
Sure. Jamboard is an interactive whiteboard for kind of digital collaboration. And really what we'll be doing in Jamboard is sharing some ideas at different moments throughout the presentation. And to share those ideas, we'll give you some instruction when those moments come, and I'll share the Jamboard again at those moments. But we'll ask you to put a sticky note on the screen, sharing your thoughts. And so it's really not much different than clicking a little button and typing it into it, just like you would write on a sticky note and putting it on a virtual whiteboard to share so everyone can see.
You can also participate by using the raise your hand feature and the reactions button at the bottom of your screen, or opportunities to unmute yourself and discuss or ask a question, or use the chat, which you can use for everyone, or you can privately chat, probably Dave or Rebecca, since I will be unable to see the chat.
Yep.
Okay. So the main goal of our research, we had a matchmaker from SUNY that introduced us and said, I think you both have similar interests in the field of UDL. And so within our respective roles, myself being in disability services and Rebecca being within a faculty and now administrative role, we wanted to explore the student perspective, right, on the benefits and barriers that they've experienced during this time. hear about their narratives and their stories, and identify what instructors, but also what institutions at large can do to better support these students, and really wanting to not just collect data and present on it or write on it, but really identify what are the lessons learned moving forward. I think we can all agree that the pandemic isn't over, and the effects of the pandemic won't go away anytime soon. The landscape of education, especially higher education, has changed. And I think one of the things that the shift to remote learning and COVID-19 has done is to make clearer inequities that we have in education, higher education, for many different students of marginalized backgrounds, but particularly students with disabilities. And so we're wanting to use this data to provide education and discussion on what we can do better moving forward, and not just checking off a box in the moment or responding to an emergency response in the moment, but how we can better support moving forward. So our main project goals here again, developing training for faculty, improving the ways we can support students moving forward, and enhance student and faculty knowledge of what supports and accommodations and technologies are available to us. So again, we enrolled, recruited students who were connected to their respective disability or accessibility services office at SUNY Geneseo and SUNY Oswego for at least one semester. They needed to not have yet graduated and were part of a traditional age group, 18 to 24. 40 students total fully completed the survey that we had. So again, we had 40 students, not a huge N, but still very fruitful data that we collected. A majority of our students were white, female, and just under 30% were first generation students, self-identified. Students were asked multiple choice and open-ended questions. We used a Qualtrics online survey. They also had the opportunity to participate in a one-on-one interview as an alternative if they did not want to participate in the survey. So our questions asked about the barriers and benefits of remote learning, ways they felt supported or excluded, and strategies that they used to help overcome any challenges that they experienced. All participant responses were completely anonymous, and we used Deduce, which is an online coding system, to code and analyze our data. I just included some related research here, and we are going to put the link to these slides in the chat for you so you can access any links that are being provided. These two studies, the SERU COVID-19 survey and the ECAR study, actually happened pre-COVID, but still really important information from students with disabilities about the kind of supports and technologies that are really essential for them to have equal access in the classroom. So I do strongly recommend taking a look at those surveys. And since the beginning of COVID-19, there has been some research done, not a ton, but some research has been done about the perspective of students with disabilities and what kind of access they did or did not have in the shift to remote learning. AHEAD, which is the Association of Higher Education and Disability, did a nationwide assessment of students with disabilities. Here are a few results. Over half reported difficulty receiving accommodations. Nearly 80% reported difficulty obtaining needed technology, support, and training. And 75% reported difficulty communicating with course instructors. Similarly, there was a study published just this year, June of this year, that surveyed little over the amount of students that we surveyed, 66 undergraduate students who were mainly focused in those STEM courses. But they did an interview-like study. Their methodology and questions were very similar to ours. And the results indicated that students similar to our study and similar to the previous AHEAD study, and probably similar to other studies, related studies, Students reported a lack of access to their accommodations, that they just weren't provided their accommodations. They had lack of access to support services on campus, and inaccessible course content was a challenge as well. Okay, so now we'll go into the themes that we developed. Just a quick note that in the interest of preserving anonymity of what school the students are referring to in their narratives, we substituted some minor things. We substituted the name of the school, name of the academic department, type of LMS that was used, since we use different learning management systems. Okay, just to provide some context. We wanted to provide quotes that gave context as to what our students were going through this past year, kind of aside from the academic piece. Like I mentioned, COVID-19 and the shift to remote learning really highlighted a huge gap, right? Widened that equity gap for many different kinds of students. For some, they had really good Wi-Fi at home. They may have had a home office. They were in good physical health. While others were trying to work in crowded apartments downstate, unreliable technology, lack of access to healthcare, mental health care. So it's important when we talk about access and accessibility that we have an understanding there are other equity issues at play here other than just disability. One student quoted, "I never learned how to be an online student. It's not something I'm comfortable with." Right, so skills with technology, time management, communication when learning remotely looks really different remotely compared to an in-person class. And students really struggle with navigating how to learn remotely and particularly asynchronously. That's something that we saw frequently. Another student said, "I traveled back to my apartment after a while to focus and study. However, it was difficult having a roommate doing the same thing, and it was stressful not being able to utilize quiet areas on campus." So remember, many students were living with multiple roommates, so Wi-Fi was impacted, or those in residence halls who are trying to do synchronous classes at the same time as roommates, and there was really no place for a quiet space for them. Another student said, "It feels like a lot of the times I'll attend a Zoom class and feel like a shadow. I just blend in with the blank screen of Zoom and try to focus on the equally bored and miserable looking professor." So sometimes students were trying to learn an environment they were really unfamiliar with, an environment that the instructor may have been unfamiliar with as well. And so it's just this sense of feeling really uncomfortable and not knowing what to do. Another student quoted, "Having a quiet space, staying motivated, being able to try to learn the material with little instruction or guidance in real time, trying to have a job in between it all, as well as keeping a somewhat organized schedule. It's like hell." So students struggled, we found, with that homeschool balance in a way that many didn't have to face before when we were in person on campus. So it was really a time of great stress and uncertainty that I think it's safe to assume we all felt at that time, but for students, they had a really hard time coping with it. So in reference to a question that we asked about the barriers they may have faced, additional barriers they may have faced, the student reported illness and many distractions at home due to noisy environments. There is also no workspace at home. I also have to make sure to be there for my family since we all had COVID-19 and lost some family members. So beyond those academic struggles, many were trying to navigate a new normal and deal with personal tragedy. I think it's important that we recognize that. Students really struggled with a lack of routine, working amongst increased distraction, which is really hard for our students with attention deficit disorders or maybe cognitive and mental health disabilities. They also had increased responsibilities. They now had to become caretakers for sick or elderly relatives or younger siblings who were also learning remotely at home because K-12 was also shut down at that time. So they were dealing with a lot. So we'll use our Jamboard to facilitate discussion. So noticing these equity issues, how might we begin supporting students moving forward? What are your thoughts? So you can either provide your thoughts via chat, You can do the raise your hand feature and unmute, or use the Jamboard that Rebecca has put in the chat. Oh, so I do see the chat. Okay. Any thoughts here about some of the quotes that you've seen? And how can we better support students moving forward, even with returning to in-person classes?
There's multiple frames in the Jamboard. You can add your thoughts to the first frame for this first reflection. One person's put on the Jamboard, provide weekly reminders, guidelines, and weekly feedback to the students. Great suggestion. Any other thoughts? Again, you can either participate in Jamboard or you can put notes in the chat as well. Show empathy and humanity. Those are certainly two good suggestions. I don't see much more movement at the moment, but definitely things to be thinking about. They're hard questions to answer, right? Hard questions to think about. We do have some tips as we go forward too. So hopefully that might prompt more ideas. There's another thought here. Share some of our own experiences during these times of struggle and perhaps suggest coping mechanisms. Good. Build in opportunities to check in with students and provide clear pathways and a safe space for students to communicate challenges they are facing and that might be invisible to a faculty member. Yeah, treating everybody in the room as a human, right? Who has things going on outside of the classroom is certainly a good start as we move forward into this semester. Because certainly we're still humans as the semester starts. And there's also, I know the Jamboard's very easy to use and also a great way to get students engaged. Students really like platforms like this. And you could still use this in a classroom setting or online, right? Like it works in both contexts. Want to move to the next section, Amy?
Organization instruction.
Yeah. So 25% of our respondents indicated that one of the benefits to online and remote learning has been clearer course requirements, right? And that we kind of almost indicated that a little bit in the reflection we were just doing. Deadlines and syllabi have been more clear, partly because these materials have all been collected in a content management system, and maybe previously they weren't. They were kind of scattered. People handed them out and they weren't kind of all collated in the same place. And so as we move forward, especially with SUNY's commitment to kind of reduce paper, faculty and students alike are going to need to kind of negotiate how to handle that, how to be more digital, but also, you know, we're going to continue using our learning management systems, especially now that more of us know how to use them effectively, right? So we can expect that even for in-person courses, and in those same in-person courses, we might distribute our materials using those platforms that we might have used in a remote situation. So along these lines, one student reported professors hide different assignments in different sections of the learning management system. And it's almost like a game of scavenger hunt or a game where to find out where my next assignment will show up in. So we need to make sure that our students don't think they're playing a game, right? And make it a little more clear where our materials are. Another student noted, I've only had one course that was all online, which was my easiest to navigate and my most fulfilling class in terms of the material I learned. It was rigid with its modules, with easy to understand and follow video presentations, and everything was always posted on schedule. Unfortunately, that was my only class like this. My other courses were absolutely all over the place. And this is a good indication, right, that like structure and organizing And making sure that it's routine is so important for students because they have 5 different classes, right? So it's like 5 different systems. So along those lines, our tip number 1 along organization and structure is consistent structure in the LMS. So 33% of our respondents indicated the importance of organization in the learning management system and the timely availability of course materials. So if students are, and as I just mentioned, if students are in 5 different classes, that's 5 different ways they're experiencing the learning management system, right? And of course, we each think our own organization methodology is the best, right? And like we should all adhere to like if you're in my class, you should adhere to my organization method because it's definitely better than someone else's. So we really want to make sure that we're being explicit about what our organization structure is and how we have our modules, units, or weeks organized, and make that really explicit and obvious to students because they have to learn the system because the systems are all likely different in some way, right? And so when possible, it could be advantageous for departments to coordinate some basic organizational structures for additional consistency. And we definitely don't want students to spend their time and effort looking for materials. We want them engaging with those materials, right? So if finding them is a big battle, then you know they're not going to have the time to engage with those materials. So let's make that process a little easier. Along these lines, one student reported, it's much easier to do things when everything for a unit is due on the same day every 2 weeks. So that's that idea of consistency, right? It's something that's expected. There's not all these surprises. There's a routine built in that students can plan around. We have a lot of students that have part-time jobs and things, right? They might have family responsibilities. And so being able to plan their time accordingly can be really helpful. Another student reported that one barrier faced is a lack of closed captioned videos, whether that's linked videos, recorded Zoom videos, or certain Zoom functions. Some teachers post their content that I would need after the assignment is due or a few days after the fact. So this goes back to this idea of really needing timely materials. So, you know, we get the videos, we make sure they got captioning, even if it's kind of automated captioning initially, and we get those available to students as soon as possible, even if that means we need to kind of iteratively like go back in and edit captions and make them better. Like get it to the students first and like continually to involve the accessibility of those materials over time.
Luckily, since we collected this data, Zoom has provided some fantastic live transcription features. So if you are providing your instruction via Zoom, please tell students about the live transcription. It is automatically enabled onto all of our accounts, and it can be a huge game changer for many students.
And it is important to note that the instructor has to turn it on, right? Like it doesn't, unfortunately, it's not just like automatically on and available. The instructor does need to like click a button to say to turn it on. So be sure to do that so that students don't have to ask you and disclose if they need them. So our next kind of takeaway is this consistent schedule and routine that we've started talking about. And this includes when materials are available to students, when items are due, and when items might be returned. Establishing such a routine is good for both students and the faculty, right? Because then we can all manage our time more effectively. It would also be helpful to have materials due, could be helpful to have materials due in the middle of the week rather than over the weekend or first thing on Monday so that students can get access to you if they need help if you're not available on the weekend. So think about what your own availability is and make sure that like you have some availability prior to a deadline. 60% of our respondents indicated that one of their keys for success was the implementation of time management strategies and aids. So many students indicated that they use things like to-do lists, calendars, and planners. And the more we can help as faculty set up scaffolding and structures to help students plan and manage their time, you know, the better for everybody, right? So although they have planners and things in place, sometimes they don't know what to put in the planner or in the calendar, right? And so if we can nudge them in the right direction, that's really helpful. One student reported that it's so extremely time consuming to watch all those videos and barely get anything out of it because I had no idea what to write down. It was so unorganized. So if we're using videos, right, we need to make sure that they're structured, right? Beginning, middle, and an end. There's some clear points. Perhaps it's not a 50-minute rambly video, right? You want to think about being concise and organized. Having something like a skeleton notes could be really useful in a situation like this, so that a student can start to pull out the main ideas and start to realize what's important, or reinforce main points with slides. Another student reported some professors also just throw up the link to the textbook and that's it. No interaction, no actual teaching. I could literally buy the textbook on my own without paying thousands of dollars, so I don't see how that's acceptable. So obviously want to move beyond just like reading in the text or lecturing at students, and offering some engaging active learning opportunities to interact with each other and interact with the material to learn it better. I see someone put it in the chat that happened in a grad class to them over the summer. Oof, oof, no good. And that's an area where I really think we don't always talk about kind of teaching strategies and things at the graduate level as maybe as much as we should. All right, I just wore my like new associate dean like of graduate studies hat for just a second. All right, another student reported, I guess I feel like professors are trying to make sure we're doing the work by giving us more work. Like they're not giving us PowerPoint slides so we would watch the lectures. I just feel like overall, there's no real way I feel excluded, but at the same time, everything makes me feel excluded. And this is there's some really good points here, right? That, you know, when we went virtual, many of us actually started doing more evidence-based practices, right? And maybe more small assignments, which students were like, whoa, this is a lot more stuff. I'm being held more accountable than I had been before. But also we need to think about, and I know I experienced this a little bit in some of the classes I was teaching, just think through like, is this something you would have collected and graded if you were in person? And if not, like, why are you collecting and grading it now, right? Like what changed all of a sudden, right? Like, we should respect our students and respect their ability to make good decisions, and also maybe offer them some good suggestions or guidance about like what might be a good choice and why it's a good choice. Another student, oh, I think I already read that one, right? Okay, sorry. I just got lost where we were, Amy, sorry. And then another takeaway is structured activities and interactions. Students thrive on structure, right? And if you've ever seen two really great researchers, V.G. Safi or Kelly Hogan, they talk a lot about structure as an inclusive pedagogy practice. So this is definitely something that we want to focus on here. So activities that help students tease out main ideas when reviewing course materials, like guided notes, embedded questions and videos, low stakes quizzes that you can take maybe multiple times, or discussion or reflection questions that can help students focus on main points and come prepared to class can be really helpful. Likewise, helping connect students to each other to form study groups or using class time to process materials in a peer-to-peer setting can be really valuable. Peer-to-peer learning is so useful because students then have to articulate the concepts to one another, right? And so that really reinforces things, but also makes it really clear that they're confused about something if that's the case as well. And so those peer interactions are incredibly important for learning. Plus, a novice's translation of something, right, to another novice is likely to stick far more than maybe an expert trying to remember what it was like to be a novice. So we have another reflection question for you. It's in the same Jamboard, but I'll put that link in the chat one more time just so that everyone has it. And if you want to flip to the next frame, there's a little up next to the title of the document, there's little arrows, and you can hit an arrow to flip to frame 2. Or sorry, frame 3 for organization. What are ways you have or will build an organization or structure for your students?
Again, you can unmute yourself and talk, utilize the Jamboard, or use the chat.
Really, whatever works for you. So having clear, discrete modules in Canvas. Each module has the same flow of information and structure. The students get used to the organization of the course. Great. Our LMS has a great calendar feature to quickly eye the assignments that are due, strive to have a similar schedule each week. Yeah, all of these things can be really helpful. Anything else anyone's tried over the past year that's worked really well in terms of structure or helping students stay organized? I know that I moved to having things due on Wednesdays in my classes, and students have really liked that. It was consistent, so I always know when things are coming and going, but then that gives students plenty of cushion to kind of get help or try something over a weekend and get some help, early on the week before something is due as well. Any other strategies folks have used? Weekly reminders of due dates. Due dates for different assignments are consistent. For example, quizzes are always on Thursdays. That's great. I know that early on in the pandemic, I also did that like weekly reminder thing, and students loved it. They said how valuable that was. Although I always wish someone would send me a weekly reminder of everything I needed to do too, but sometimes writing that weekly reminder for students reminded me of all the things I also needed to do. I see another one here. I try to provide time estimates for tasks and reading assignments so people can budget time going in. Great. I teach a course in productivity tools. One of their assignments each week is to plan all of their coursework for the week. It seems like a great way to introduce productivity tools for sure. Include deliberate discussion of structure in class on a regular basis, not just on the first day or syllabus week or syllabus review. So important. Build in discussion of time management and scaffolding strategies into class activities as well. Yeah, these are all really great suggestions. I will just also remind everyone, there's some really great suggestions in the Jamboard, and that Jamboard will stay available to all of you so you can revisit it to get further ideas. I see another one. I send a reminder the morning an assignment is due, and I do it for every single assignment using the announcement option in the LMS. That allows me to delay posts so I can schedule when these reminders are released. Yes, take advantage of some of these automated features that can make you seem present all the time, right? Even if you're not really actually available all the time, right? It gives students kind of some security that you're around and available.
In addition, just for your syllabus, in addition to the accessibility syllabus statement, I'm also including in the chat a new webpage that I updated for student resources. I included, of course, some academic, social, mental health, and other resources for new students. But I also included helpful apps and technologies that students find to be really helpful for organization, note-taking, time management. So if you just want to throw that link maybe in your Canvas announcement or something like that, I think that could be helpful. Or if you just wanted to check out some of these apps yourself.
Related to one of the suggestions as well, I'm also putting in the Wake Forest University coursework time estimator, which can be really helpful if you're trying to think about how much work you're giving to folks. This newer version, the 2.0 version that I put in the chat, does also have like online assignments, things like discussion boards that weren't available in a previous version that was out by Rice University. It's the same developers. So the next kind of category of things is flexibility. And 40% of our respondents talked about instructor flexibility. They highlighted the need for flexibility because their mental and physical health is fluid, right? These are students who are living with disabilities or chronic illness. They have flare-ups and bad days. Instructor and flexibility creates barriers, and flexibility provides the inclusion that we need. So students noted different ways flexibility can be at play, and we've highlighted some of these themes in this section. So one student noted, I feel that some professors are really taking the whole situation in stride and are working with us in order to make everyone comfortable. For example, over the summer, my academic department sent out a survey on how we wanted to approach the fall 2020 semester since it was so unprecedented. And this is just a great example of ways that departments have rallied together to include students in conversations about how things might run or how things might work. And this is a great thing. We don't hear student voices all the time, right? In some ways, hearing the student voices even in this way that we're presenting today is somewhat of an anomaly, right? We often see research and stuff, but not with the student voice with it. So, I hope everyone will start, communicating more with students to really dig into what it is that they need and want. Another student noted, I felt included when a teacher did not require cameras at an 8 a.m. class and took a writing assignment in an alternative format. So, sometimes we can be open to the way that someone can demonstrate meeting a learning objective, right? So writing is one way, but maybe making a video or an animation or doing a performance or any number of other things could be an alternative for a student to demonstrate those same skill sets. Now, obviously that can't happen in every class. So for example, I teach web design, and it's hard to demonstrate the learning objectives in web design if you're not designing websites, right? Like that's kind of the thing, right? So, there's places where you can be flexible in every class, right? And there might be pieces that you cannot be flexible in because that's really core to whatever the discipline is, right? That's a core learning objective. So just be flexible. Think about ways that you can be creative or allow some choice for students. So our first takeaway is student choice and agency. I do see some down here. Time estimators are great, but they don't take in consideration for students using tech such as JAWS, for example. Yeah, totally, right? Yes. If you're using assistive technology or even just someone who's struggling with the material, it's going to take longer. But it does give you at least a rough idea of what you're thinking. And then I always, when I'm looking at something like that, I always expect it's going to take longer than any estimator. And it's definitely going to take about 5 times longer than I thought it was going to, right? Like as an instructor. So yeah, that's a really good, important note in the chat. So yeah, don't forget about that, of course. So when we're thinking about student choice and agency, we've talked a little bit about kind of compassion early on as we're thinking about, in that first reflection question. But, students are indicating that they need a little agency. They want to have a little choice, a little say in their studies, a little say in their academic experience. And so we can ask students for input on collaboration on communication and delivery. We can ask them about their personal goals for the course, some of the content, classroom policies, or even about specific learning assessments. And as many of us are transitioning back to physical classrooms after being online, we don't want to necessarily slip back into old routines, but maybe learn from some of the opportunities that we had previously or that we've experienced online. And we will continue to need to make adaptations, right? Like people are masked, right? Like there's all kinds of things that create, different things that we need to flex and get creative around. So being open with our students about these transitions and the things we're thinking about and the things they're thinking about can improve our experiences significantly overall. I know one activity I did, our classes started this week. So one activity I did on the first day was actually asking students, I made one of these, a Jamboard-like activity, and asked students to contribute what's on their mind besides just school. Like what is weighing on their minds that is kind of stressing them out already before school already starts. And we just kind of talked about all the elephants in the room. And I think that helps set a nice tone to being open to what students might want to contribute. And I happen to be teaching synchronously online this semester. So I also did a design activity that I do often with teams at the end of a team component where we say, what do we want to keep? What do we need? And what do we need to get rid of? And so I just asked them from their online experiences they've had in the past, like what should go in those categories? And that was really helpful as well. So the more you can involve students, get creative about the ways to get their voice in there, the better. Yeah, check-ins with and touch base with students at the beginning of class is always a great strategy.
You can also do that in person as well. Jamboard is fantastic for if you're doing courses remotely. There's a number of free, what we call like a word cloud generator or poll, remote polls that students can use their devices, such as their phones, to provide an anonymous response to a question that you might have in class, and the answer can come right up on the projector, right up on the board. It's anonymous, but that's a really great way to kind of poll students if they might feel uncomfortable talking about that, those kind of things in person.
And
Right.
yep, I was gonna say Lori's noting Top Hat is available on your campus. Great. So as we keep thinking about flexibility, another student noted, I did not like the time constraints of some activities. It makes me feel slow and dumb, right? And sometimes it's because we're trying to pack so much into a class period, right? Like this activity is going to take 10 minutes, and it can cause some undue stress, right? This can also happen with tests, right? That, what's the point of the time constraint? Is it because you really need to be able to do something in that amount of time, or that's like an arbitrary time because that's how long the class period is? Are you measuring just someone's ability to race against the clock? Or are you actually measuring the learning outcomes, right, that you're trying to achieve? So really think about when you're using time, what's the role of the time? Can that time be flexible? Is there an ability in the class to allow students to kind of progress at different rates? Maybe, maybe not. Is there an ability to start something in class, but give opportunities for more time after class, right? There's different ways that we can think about kind of extending time here, or not putting arbitrary constraints in place. And another student noted that I've had teachers as of fall 2020 that understand that mental health is important, and they have allowed me to go at my own pace. And I know that this is something that I've heard from my colleagues and from students, is that there's just a much more general awareness of mental health and a much bigger, like a valuing of mental health that maybe hadn't been so visible or present before. And so I personally hope that this is something that continues as we move into the 2021-2022 academic year, that, mental health is still front and center, and that we're respecting that as an important part of health and wellness, and that also can be something that can really put a lot of cognitive strain on someone, right? And being supportive of each other. So our kind of second flexibility takeaway is pacing and timing. 47.5% of our respondents indicated that one of the benefits of remote and online learning is the ability to work at their own pace, which is, that's a lot. That's a big group of students who said, I can work at a different pace than what maybe I could do if it was in person. And 40% indicated that a benefit was to work at times that work best for them. So there was some flexibility built in about when they could work on coursework. And then as instructors, we need to think about why we set those time limits, as I noted, whether or not we can extend time beyond the class session. And flexibility doesn't mean accepting work at just any random time either, right? Submitting past the due date often isn't great for students either. They need scaffolding and the ability to kind of revise and take steps. That's not to say that like there aren't exceptions. There should always be exceptions, right? Like someone might have something really important and really crazy that's happened in their lives that we need to accommodate. But we don't want to just keep saying like, oh, you can turn that in whenever. You can turn that in like 5 weeks from now, 5 weeks from now, 5 weeks from now, because that's not helping a student accomplish the goals of the course. Another student noted that faculty provided me with their personal time to go over things I may not understand and allowed for work to be resubmitted for a better grade. So this is a great demonstration of this ability to kind of learn from mistakes. That is why we are all in education, I think, right, is to continue to improve. So ways that we can build in kind of forgiveness into our grading schemes and methodologies is valuable. So, low stakes testing or the ability to resubmit, these things can be really valuable. So our last tip for flexibility is this idea of revisions and do-overs. So building in opportunities to reflect and revise are important to the learning process, as we know. Low stakes assignments, the ability to retake quizzes, revise assignments, all provide flexibility to optimize learning for all students. Do-overs or life happens tokens are one way you can kind of support students by allowing them to redeem a token for an extension or the ability to revise within a particular time frame. The key is like within a particular time frame is what makes it manageable for you as a faculty member. And flexibility doesn't mean that students do whatever they want, whenever they want, but rather support them in their learning journey to meet their course objectives. Set up boundaries like specific timeframes for when you'll need to accept revisions or how many revisions you can like reasonably accept that keep your own workload under control while still offering flexibility and support. Because as instructors, we are humans too, and we also have things to do beyond just our roles at the university. Faculty have added subtitles to their video lectures, which is super helpful. And we've talked about this a little bit before, but this helps a wide variety of students in a lot of different contexts. So I hope that we'll continue doing that moving forward. Another student noted that in response to a question about barriers for online readings and videos, some couldn't be downloaded to be used offline, which can be helpful when doing homework in places with no Wi-Fi. And this is something that I think we often overlook, is that we just assume everyone is online all the time. But actually, we have many students who are in situations where, unless they're on campus, they may not have access to stable Wi-Fi, right? So the ability to have their assignments on the go and to be able to do things at other times when they don't have to be connected to the internet is really important. Another student noted all of their instructor lectures were available online in both PDF format and with video, so I could go back and listen to the audio. Project assignments had freedom to them, and you were either allowed to pick the topic or write about, or had the freedom to do a more non-traditional project instead of a paper or be more creative. And this is just demonstrating some really great UDL techniques, right? And it's wonderful that a student was able to capture that and have that experience. So our kind of last takeaway for flexibility is accessible formats and multiple formats. So 35% of our students outlined strategies that they use to be successful that really only work if they have a digital format. So they're using strategies that are only going to work if we're providing some of this content in a digital way. These strategies varied, but often relied on the accessible nature of materials. The fact that they had transcripts or tag PDFs so that they could search or take easy notes from things or have materials be read aloud to them. Accessible texts also allowed students to use the materials in different formats. So, on my campus, we have Blackboard Ally that allows us to have some different formats, right? And I'm sure you guys have that in Canvas too, right, Amy?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. So that's, that if you provide something in an accessible format, that it can be provided in these other formats as well. It makes them searchable. These are all good things, right, for all of our students. And having asynchronous content allows students to go back and review or revise material. So having options about how to demonstrate learning is key. Unless the format is critical to the learning objectives, the format shouldn't be a critical part of being successful. And this might come in the form of an unessay or a choice between a media project, like a podcast or a more traditional research paper. And so if you're familiar with universal design for learning, which I hear you are on this campus, then many of the things that have been highlighted directly align with this universal design for learning framework. I think in the interest of time, Amy, we might have to skip this reflection, yeah?
If you have thoughts, you can certainly add to the Jamboard and maybe we can go back to it or put your thoughts about ways you have or will build in flexibility for your students in the chat. So a third theme that emerged from our data was this idea of community building and providing a supportive environment. So some main takeaways that emerged here we found was that showing students who care goes a long way. Someone already said showing care, empathy, show that you're a human being. It really goes a really long way in the way that students connect with you and connect with the course. Finding creative ways to engage students was important. And facilitating a welcoming and inclusive environment for all students is really critical. This student reported the professors reaching out to me when they notice things are kind of off, having an open conversation and an open line of communication. Almost 60% of our participants indicated that a welcoming and supportive line of communication was very important to them, showing empathy and understanding that you are human beings, you have lives outside of being instructors as well. And just that simple email or start of class to say, how are things? On a scale of 1 to 10, how are things going? How can I support you better? That goes a really long way. Some of my professors have gone over the moon to ensure that I was successful in their classes and have good experiences. They have talked to me about projects or big exams weeks in advance in order to come up with a plan for success. They also did not ask any questions if I had to take breaks during class or make a big deal out of me quietly stepping out. They have made me feel supported and not embarrassed, as some have. I think it's important that we're treating our students like adults, though they're young, they are still adults. And it's important to treat them as such, and we don't understand what might be going on in their lives, not making assumptions about the student and assuming that they want to be there, they want to learn, and they just have some challenges that they need support with. So a takeaway here is checking in on students. That simple check-in can really, again, go a long way. Using virtual whiteboards that everyone could participate in and speaking to us personally over topics other than math, like how we were doing, how the semester was going for us, little things and discussions like that, I feel definitely allow students to be more comfortable with their professors in an uncomfortable class environment. Virtual whiteboard, that's right, kind of like what we're doing. Nearly a quarter of our students reported what a difference it made to have activities and a course structure that promoted community and peer interaction, even in a virtual space and even asynchronously. This student reported some professors made sure that some students participate by calling them out. So many of my students indicated it was so hard for them to focus on the screen for several hours a day. And I think we can all relate to that. So this student indicated that having an active discussion was important rather than just straight lecture, right? Not just for students, for us as well. But I think being flexible and being deliberative in telling students how they can participate via the Jamboard, via the chat, either private or public, participating in like a shared Google Doc, or as an alternative, maybe sharing their thoughts via email outside of class, if that would make them feel more comfortable. Just being flexible and adaptive with students and their various needs. Many teachers expect you to be outgoing and ready. They also don't take into account just because I don't have a learning disability, that my anxiety isn't real. So again, for students who do struggle with participating, think about other ways that students can be involved, chat, Google Doc, facilitating breakout groups maybe could, to avoid the cold calling individual students during class, because that can be really anxiety provoking for some students. And not assuming that students that don't have their cameras on are the ones that are still sleeping or doing other things, which may happen, but most likely it's because having their camera on is pretty anxiety provoking. So that takeaway, encouraging participation and interaction and being creative about that is a really big takeaway from our students. Rebecca noted some of my most engaged and active students didn't have their cameras on. That's a good point. Another student said, I don't feel discriminated in my classes due to my disabilities, but I do wish some professors wouldn't ignore your accommodations and be more understanding. My sophomore year here, I had to drop a class. I had a class that I dropped, but the professor did not understand why I needed extra time for his pop quizzes and gave me attitude when I explained it. So for me, on my end, a really concerning finding in our study was that 30% reported that previously approved accommodations were not provided. So it's really important for colleges to communicate with faculty and staff that there's a really clear understanding of students' rights to accommodations, regardless of the teaching modality. That's really important. And that was actually reflected in some of the studies we talked about at the beginning of our talk here today. So if you do have questions or concerns, you're not quite sure how an accommodation could be implemented remotely, instead of not providing it, simply contact me, or you can talk to the student as well. But it's really important that students get their accommodations. It's harder to understand people with the mask on. Even when people wear clear masks, it fogs up and I still can't understand what they're saying. So we noted that that can be a barrier. Try to work with the accessibility office to identify other methods, microphones, maybe a transcription service, maybe simply the arrangement of the room, voice amplification. That's why having accessible audio and video content is so important to have those captions available. And many of my students found, again, that Zoom live transcription feature was a total game changer for them, and not just students who are hard of hearing. The student said, I feel discriminated against by my peers because my disability isn't inherently something physical or visible that others can see. So on the outside, it doesn't look like I have a disability, even though I do. And people judge me for utilizing accessibility resources because I don't have a visible disability. Other students are jealous that I get extra time on quizzes and exams, perhaps because they think that this is an advantage, right? Instead of seeing this as an accommodation that helps level the playing field. So that main takeaway here is community, that community and belonging. Takeaway number 3, meeting students' needs. That's really critical, not just meeting the accommodations that they're approved for, but making sure students' needs are met. And using a universal design for learning framework can ensure that all students' needs are being met and not just meeting what is on the letter of accommodation, but meeting the needs of all different kinds of students. There's a reflection here. What are ways you have or will building community and belonging for your students? Again, in our last few minutes that we have here, you can put your responses in Jamboard, unmute yourself to discuss, or you can put that in the chat. I know we have just a few minutes left today. Again, Rebecca put in the presentation link, so you have access to the presentation and all the hyperlinks. If you have questions, our email address is listed on the slide. You should have my email address. And in addition, I think, Rebecca, did we provide a link for our resources document? Find additional resources for these suggestions. Resources for accessible and inclusive classrooms. Fantastic. So make sure you grab that link before you head out today. Does anyone have any questions, thoughts, comments?
We appreciate your time and attention today for sure. And feel free to continue to revisit the Jamboard or contribute, as you think through some of these ideas a little bit.
Oh, we have a
Amy and Rebecca, I just wanted to say quickly, thank you very much for sharing your expertise. There's so many good ideas in here, and not just for students with disability, but for all students, which is the idea for universal design. So.
Thanks, Dave.
I think someone had their hand raised. Jackie?
Yeah, Jackie.
That was me. I just had a quick question, and I see that there are some CA, or they were, I don't know, I guess they're gone. I was going to ask a question that one of the things that with the online classes is that we give extended time on quizzes and exams, and we can do that on Canvas pretty easy. But the only issue, or it's more of a challenge, I guess, for me, is that I would love to have ability to select that person and always just say, give this person extra time on these assignments and just have it selected. But it becomes where you have to do it into one at a time. Every single assessment, you have to go in and manually change it. And that's a problem that I encounter because I forget or I miss them. And then then I feel awful because I have, not given them extra time when usually that's what they deserve. And it's one of those things that's more of a CIT question rather than yours, but it would be great as we add more accessibility stuff to our management systems. It'd be great if we can have these things where we can actually like go to the person themselves and put in criteria so we can actually always support them. So it's not really a question, I guess.
So that's a really good point. Actually, something I've thought about too, if there was some sort of method for doing that, I can quickly message our CIT people to see if that is a feature within Canvas, if that even exists. I know they do recommend maybe in gradebook and like comments to indicate what kind of accommodations that student might have, so you can kind of quickly refer to it in Canvas instead of having to go back through your email and maybe look. But I can certainly message our CIT folks to see if that's a possibility. It should. It seems logical.
Yeah, I just thought of it when you were talking about extended time. I was like, well, when I teach my online classes, it's a little bit more challenging because I have to go into for each person and do it for each assignment, and it's just a little time consuming, but it'd just be easier.
I think these are the things that we want to push back on LMSs, right? And start saying like, you need to be doing things in more accessible ways. And here are all the things that we try to do and why it's a problem and why we're not being supportive of our students. And so, I think it behooves our institutions to like push together. And, maybe Amy, that's something we can bring up to NASLE and start thinking about it at the SUNY level.
All right, thanks.